Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am very excited. Seb's got the hands going already. It's been a while since you've been on, Seb, so don't worry. We're going to get you in here soon. Now, while I am excited, y'all should be too. We got all kinds of great stuff, so make sure you're liking the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays and Wednesdays. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all during the conversation, put them up in the comment section. We will engage those throughout. Other than that, let's get some intros. So, Mike, you're on top here. Give me a quick 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff. Give her.
Hey, everyone. Chance, thanks for having me on. Hey, guys, I am an industry blogger for the tactical industry, spotup.com. I'm also a podcaster, and I am a grandfather. Love that. That's probably the most important thing in my life right now. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. Good to have you. Joey, how about yourself?
Hello, my name's Joey. I am a full-time cop. I'm on our SWAT team, firearms instructor. I run police post training and 9mm Musashi on Instagram. And then I'm also a captain in the Army Reserve. Most importantly, I am a father and a husband. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Seb, how about yourself? It's been a while. You're going to have to update us.
Yeah, it has been a while. Seb Lavoie spent 23 years of combined service between military and law enforcement, spent 16 of those years in the tactical space, and I'm super happy to be back.
It is good to have you, Sean. How's the wind behind your ears?
It's feeling a bit cool in my office this morning. Just glad to be here. Good to see the fellas and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. Now, what I wrote down earlier, building and rebuilding. And I want to give you guys a quick little blurb on that before we dive into it and get some opinions. What I was thinking was the concept of training for something or building up to something or developing yourself in a certain way up to a point and either having an injury or a some sort of circumstance that takes you out of the game, or perhaps, you know, a new life event. You have a child, now you're going to reset how you're thinking. And I wanted to get your guys' thoughts right off the bat on the idea of physically and mentally building yourself up to that point and then having to switch gears or change completely, or perhaps, oh, I don't know, lose a leg, Seb, in case we haven't already got over that. But let's get your guys' thoughts right off the bat. Seb, I'm going to start with you. Hit me out. What are your thoughts?
Coincidentally, obstacles are the path. You know, I never look at construction or any construction project as a linear process. I mean, it just doesn't happen. You need to be prepared for the setbacks. You need to be prepared for the unforeseen. You need to be prepared for, you know, and so that metaphorically applies to everything we do, not just construction. And I believe that if you set yourself on a sort of a course of action where everything must constantly move forward and you never go backwards, every time you have a little setback, that setback is magnified, as opposed to, yep, this is part of the process, carry on.
I like that. Mike, what are your first thoughts?
Well, first thoughts goes back to my own journey, but you know, I think that any of this, the work of recovery and rebuilding, is long term, and it's punctuated by moments of crisis. So if you're not always working on something, you are not going to be ready when a moment of crisis comes. So it's a long term thing. It's not where you actually build post fact, but pre. That's my thought on that.
I like it. Joey, first thoughts?
Initial thoughts. I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy, and I have a little challenge coin. I actually 2 different challenge coins I carry around. One is Memento Mori, and the other is when you were born, the clock started. This can all be taken from you. And right now, I am leading an incredibly blessed life, and constantly having that reminder that a tragedy can happen at any time, and loss can happen, and it does happen, and that's part of life. Just constantly reminding yourself that, and not in a way that drags you down and makes you a negative person, but I think it's something that helps me appreciate things that much more when I'm constantly reminding myself that peace and prosperity is actually kind of an anomaly in human existence, and just helping myself keep that in the forefront of my mind, that I have an incredibly blessed life, and setbacks can and will happen, and not to treat that as the end of the world, but just another part of our life.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, thoughts on this?
Sure do. And I think that partly I'm to blame for not putting out a very truthful message in the past when I talk about stay on the path. Just get on the path, walk the path, the way. Just keep moving forward. And as I've often described it in the past, I think I've made it too simplistic. I think that people in their mind's eye visualize a straight road that goes out in front of them. Yeah, just get another inch down the road, pal. But really, what it looks like in my mind, I've never described it as such, is that scene in Lord of the Rings where the two hobbits they're at the gates of Mordor and they've just kind of taken a little left hook and now they're scooching up the mountain there. It's a freaking bonkers mountain, by the way. But it's like scribbly, scrabbly, like barely hanging on, and it's jiggity jaggedy, and there's rocks, and you're going this way, then you're going that way, then you're going this way to go that way. And that's kind of life, man. That little section that they covered is kind of life. Because when you're going up the path is not only not a straight line, it has freaking mega consequences if you're not making the right decisions. Or failures, you can call them that. But consequences, significant consequences. And so the other aspect is, for a guy like me who's super freaked out by heights, as I'm scrabbling up that thing, I've got the psychological impact of, man, this is a lot. This is a bit much. And so it's not just the path that you're on. It's not just the view off to the right flank where you dive to your doom. It's the psychological or mental aspects of, man, I don't know if I'm up for this. I don't know if I've got the parts for this. But of course we all do. But that's a conversation that we have to have in our heads.
That's a great point. And hopefully there's not a giant spider waiting for you at the top. That's hopefully that's part of it. But so the first question I have on that is there a difference between the building mindset to the rebuilding mindset? So like, is there a different pathway in your own mind that you use when you're talking about, oh, I'm going to work towards this goal, or versus, oh, I just got smacked in the face and now what do I do? Is the mindset different or is it the same? Mike, let's start with you. What do you think?
Oh, it's absolutely different. When the building phase, you have some type of goal or mission. The rebuilding phase would be different. So, for example, if you're going to therapy and you're sharing your feelings, men just don't want to share the feelings. That's more of a feminine type thing. Men are more goal-oriented, mission-oriented. What they want to know that they have something. So, with building, you are going to be fixated on some type of, outcome. In the rebuilding phase, you have to know what is very necessary, what is slightly necessary, and what is unnecessary. And as you're sharing in therapy, I've done 3 years of that, you begin to discover the things that you thought were very important are no longer important at all. And then you now have to focus on the things that are going to bring you to that place where you can rebuild. And that may be post-marriage, that may be post losing a limb, that may be separation from the military. So that's how I see it.
I like that a lot. Joey, what are your thoughts on this?
It's funny you'd bring up separating from the military because that's something I just decided I'm going to do. I agree with you, and I also want to add something to that where it's incredibly beneficial if you're able to kind of look at yourself from a distance, almost like an animal behavioralist would do with a species that they're studying, and figure out, what am I thinking? Why am I thinking this? And why? Because depending on what's happening with you at that very moment, your mindset's going to be different, your motivations will be different, and what you need to be successful is going to be different. And being able to mentally take a step back and examine yourself without that emotional attachment that we're all going to naturally have, but to see yourself as something that you're studying is incredibly beneficial for figuring out what you need in that specific moment.
I like that. I like that a lot. Seb, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, lots of good stuff. I personally do not see them as very different, and that's simply because of the way I process information with my brain, and I do not like to silo things if I don't have to. And so I generally will look at things holistically. And so I anticipate there will be some rebuilding. I anticipate there will be some additional construction, and I will have to, maybe take it from the foundation up or do whatever the case, or whatever the circumstances are thrown at me. But I don't separate them per se in terms of mindset personally. It's all, I anticipated setbacks, their setbacks are here. It's all about adaptability and having the ability to be flexible, to be adaptable, and to continue pushing in the general direction of where you are going or what you are doing. And that may include a quote unquote tactical repositioning. That may include me, veering off course a little bit to do something else, to either add a feather to my hat or to simply sort of reset my outcome or my goal. And that's part of the process, and that's okay too. So I just don't personally sort of differentiate them, but I can totally see how it makes sense.
Absolutely. Sean, thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think that I have to be very careful with my language right now, because I think that they're the same, but they're different. So that's my opening phrase. So, rebuilding, I think that from whatever has just occurred, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a separation from a career, whether it's a physical injury, whether it's fill in the blank, I think that and then to rebuild, there's a tiny little space in there called that liminal space. I do believe there's a liminal space in there. I believe there's a liminal space in everything, but that's maybe for another day. So that liminal space can just be a second, a half a second. It could be half a day, could be half a year. The liminal space is up to you to reframe what you're just coming out of and what you're just stepping into. Now, I said a second. If you're going from this position to this position in a second, it appears outwardly that nothing is occurring. You're just simply freaking getting on with the program. What? You just lost your leg? Okay. Now you're freaking hopping to the doctor like it's a non-factor. So to the external world, it might look like you didn't even miss a beat. And maybe internally you didn't miss a beat, but I feel that you should be taking that liminal space moment, even if it's a second, to recognize the phase shift. Because if there's a phase shift, it's something that you have to consider, if it's only momentarily. Or you can take as long as you want to consider that phase shift. But that liminal space, I believe, has to exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick little blurb in here. We got a couple comments. Giovanni, morning team listening on the road to Whistler. Good to see you. David Glavitt, howdy gang. Good to see you. On that note, though, let's go around again, because I think there's some really good information or good thoughts on the liminal space. Mike, you got any additional to go on this?
Well, I do agree with Sean, in the sense that there's a chassis, right? You've got that vehicle, and that's your faith and your purpose. There's your core values. That faith is the confidence or trust in a person or thing or some type of concept, which is going to be the same, unless there's a direct, completely change shift 180 degrees. And then your purpose is the same. So you may go out for buds, SEAL training, and that's the same. But rebuilding, maybe you're going to do some type of different kind of exercises to get trained up to get your body fit. So it could be a physical change, it could be a mental change, emotional change. So I did like what Sean said about Lord of the Rings, because I was just watching the movie Tolkien, and I thought it was fantastic. Great example of a person who built and rebuilt. And also this idea of this progression. It's not just straight ahead, but it's up and down simultaneously as you're going up that mountainside. So it's going towards that goal, but going up and down as well. But I see it as a vehicle, your core values. That's not going to change the foundation, the house, the whatever you're building, but then you're rebuilding, maybe tweaking it a little different. You're going to remodel, put a window on it. So I think that, yeah, you are going to maybe make some changes. For example, whereas before you might have had easy pleasures and addictions, you might get rid of the addictions. Maybe you put on new addictions as you're rebuilding, but hopefully you shift completely when you're rebuilding and you get to the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Joey, you got any additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, I like that you just talked, Mike, about kind of that foundation. And I think that's incredibly having those core values, knowing what you stand for, and making sure that you're constantly working towards that. So when we hit, a liminal space, we're able to react appropriately in a way that continues on those core values.
Absolutely. Seb, any thoughts?
Yeah, I like that nuance that was brought in. I call it the mission switch phase, because oftentimes that's where you're going to realize when mission switching needs to happen, and you have to have the capacity to do that. And so that's not to say that the mission itself, a broad overarching sort of concept, is changing, but the mission execution and how you're gonna do what you need to do to get where you're gonna go may need to change drastically. So it is very important to take that fraction of a second, look around, detach, make a call, right? As other people have said before.
Absolutely. John, any additional?
Yeah, I'm going to add actually some specificity to this. I'm going to use myself as the example, tell a little story, and then hopefully that'll take us further into the conversation. So a while ago, several years ago, when I was competing hard in 24-hour solo mountain bike racing, I was also doing BJJ at the same time. So sometimes I'd be doing 2 training sessions a day, a big long ride and then a BJJ session. It was kind of wearing me down. That was probably part of the issue, that after a few years, I was out on the mats and I blew my left ACL and torched my PCL and MCL. And because of that, well, it sucks if you've never done that before. It kind of hampers you a little bit. You don't get to ride as hard and as fast as you'd like, and you don't get to do the BJJ that you used to. So I had to take a moment, that liminal space. And that moment wasn't a second, by the way. It was quite a bit longer than a second, but I had to take some time. I had to pause what I was doing and allow some time to occur for something to bubble up inside of me, for me to just recalibrate myself, just not deviate. I'm going to get to Mount Doom for sure to drop that ring in the magma. That's going to freaking happen. But I had to change my scale plan. I had to change my mountain scramble plan to keep on heading towards Mount Doom, but just in a different way. So the reason I've just mentioned that is what it forced me to do is I couldn't compete anymore at the level that I wanted to, but I still freaking smash on my bike. So it didn't steal the joy of riding from me. I still do that. What it did do for me, the unexpected outcome of it, was a net positive. Because in order to continue doing BJJ, I think I blew my knee about 4 years in, and now I'm 8 years in. What I had to do was switch my game to a 180-degree switch. The first half of my BJJ career was, I'm not going to say was a hyper aggressive. It wasn't, but it was aggressive. I was used to, I know it sounds dumb as a white belt and a blue belt, but I was used to imposing my will on anyone who was of equal caliber. Like I was just, it's not that I was aggro. I just have natural aggression. And I know how to do a few things, so I could do what I wanted to do without a lot of skill. But that was holding me back. So when I torched my knee, I had to go from, oh, you don't like knee on belly? Well, you're going to get more. I had to switch from that to now I'm playing on my back. I had to start laying on my back and playing BJJ, which was not my style. And I had to get used to being flippity-flopped all over the place and taking advantage of it. Finding new ways to almost have a lazier style of BJJ. Lazy is a word that is inappropriate for my style. My style is actually crafty, not lazy. But in order to get crafty in BJJ, I had to start from scratch again 4 years in. And so now, and I've rolled with Seb, and he knows that I'm not, I didn't fall off the back of the turnip truck. I know some BJJ, but I'm not like a freaking superstar either. I'm a pretty good no-gi dude, but I'm not great. But I wouldn't be half as good as I am right now if I hadn't torched my knee. So to wrap it up, who knows where life is going to take you, man? Like Seb as an example, he managed to get in front of his injury before he got his leg cut off. He knew that it was coming up. He had time to prep. His liminal space basically shrank down to this when it was go time. But when it's like an instant injury that comes out of nowhere and it's significant, that liminal space has to occur. And it might not just be, oh, dang, I just blew my knee. What's next? And then you're straight into it a second later. I feel for unexpected, instantaneous, life-altering trajectories, you should take a little bit of time to more fully consider what your options are, and then realize this truth, that it'll all turn out for the better. As long as you keep heading in the right direction, you're going to be a better version of yourself somewhere down the near future.
That's a great point. While you were talking, it made me think of Mark Ormrod and all of the other friends I have that are missing limbs from Afghanistan and that whole area, and the fact that there's lots of times over there where you're large and in charge, you're doing the job, you're overseas, you're doing the things, and then all of a sudden you wake up in a hospital, and that is a hard change, right? There's not a lot of liminal space in that. All of a sudden you're just waking up, and I imagine you see it in the police world all the time as well, with similar consequences. So I'm wondering, do you think that it's actually a net positive to have these types of things happen to you regularly? Or do you think that it is a kind of an added benefit later on? Let's start with Joey this time. What do you think?
It's one of those things. It typically, anytime you are faced with adversity or challenge, you absolutely can grow from it. And most people do. And a lot of times people don't realize it in the moment. And if it is truly a mindset thing, that one of the things I do when something bad happens to me is I try taking a mental pause and saying, what can I learn from this? Or what is the universe trying to teach me? I like the saying that there's no enemies, only teachers. And throughout my military career, throughout my law enforcement career, as I've kind of matured and been able to take that mental pause instead of emotionally reacting to a situation, but instead, when you are faced with that adversity, you ask yourself, what can I learn, and what's being taught to me? That's something that has helped me a ton in overcoming stuff and developing a more resilient mindset, where instead of, wallowing in self-pity and being upset that this is happening to me, it, one, gives me the opportunity to be grateful for the things that I do have that are going right. But two, helps me reflect and grow from that, whether it's something like, hey, down the road, if something similar happens, I know how to react, or I know how to help someone else through a similar circumstance. That's always been my mindset in the last couple of years as things have happened for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, as I was saying before, the work of recovery and rebuilding is long term, and it's punctuated by moments of crisis. So even if you don't know that you're going to be rebuilding, at some point you really are. Whether, as the Jungian psychologists, had this idea, psychology is this idea of the collective consciousness, or the consciousness, or So in the back of your head, somehow you're working on these things, but it really comes down to discipline. And you take on responsibility, which creates order out of disorder. And so if you have a moment of crisis, there is some type of chaos, you can make some type of semblance of sense out of that chaos by doing things every day, going to the gym, going to school. You don't know why you're going to need that degree. Maybe you graduate and realize you don't need that degree, but it has opened up another door for you. But is it a good thing? I think these things are all great, but it really comes down to, what is your mindset? And for me, mindfulness and being present, with this moment awareness on the here and now, is how you remove the anxiety of the future, as the Stoics would think. And you have to have this attitude daily, if you can, of self-reflection. And that way you align your thoughts and your emotions with your core values. As I said before, what are your core values? If you don't know what they are, you better start figuring it out, because when you get married and you have kids and you have a mortgage, you have other things, and these are tough. The discipline is what gets you through it. And it's allowing you to be involved in the chaos and controlling that chaos, even if you don't know how great the chaos is or how small it is. And once you get through that chaos, it's kind of like being in a fog. And once you get through that fog, you look back and say, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And it's good. And I got something out of it. Maybe it's not what I wanted, but it's good.
I like that a lot. Seb, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do think that any opportunity to face resilience is exactly that, an opportunity to step up for myself, an opportunity to be reminded of the things that I cherish, an opportunity to be reminded to remain multidimensional, as Mike mentioned, because that's a really critical piece. I mean, when things happen with me and my leg, for example, and, thank God I didn't have to deal with being a stud and all of a sudden, boom, gone, limbs are gone. That's a completely different prospect. But there was a time, a liminal space, where I sat there, looked at myself, and soaked into it for a bit until realizing you are no longer the man you used to be. You're just not. So you can sit here in victimhood, or you can decide what is it that you are going to tap into to be the man that you ought to be. And so, I do believe that that adversity is not only something that we should expect because it's inevitable, but we should embrace it. When it hasn't happened in a while, I'm like, man, I haven't been tested in a while. That scares me. I don't like that. Just imagine transposing this skill set into any sort of tactical capacity, for example. When was the last time you got tested? And are you prepared for the big call? And so you would have your training days, and your favorite sports team would have their training day to prepare for game day, but we don't. We just wait for game day to show up, and we hope that we'll react accordingly, or appropriately rather. And I think that's a big mistake. We absolutely need to take all of the things that are occurring in our lives that are adversity ridden, and essentially embrace them and embrace the challenge and see it as an opportunity to make ourselves stronger, faster, and better for what's to come down the pipe later down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, where are you coming to on this?
So I'm not going to lie. When I mentioned that story about when I torched my knee and there went, world championships and there went whatever. When that happened, I was bummed, man. And it wasn't 1 second bummed. I was bummed for a bit. But the good news is I was bummed because I just lost a title in my head. I just lost. I may never be another. I might not get a second world championship out of this sport, which is kind of something that I thought I might shoot for, but I won't get it now. And so that title in my head, that definition of a potential future, is what caused me the most grief. What caused me the most dissonance, not grief. And so I think that that's kind of pivotal to the topic. This topic is if you have a simple title in your head that relies on your left knee, then you lose your left knee for whatever reason. Now what? You've got nothing? That's crazy. And so fortunately, I had a few titles that I could fall back on. As Seb said, as we've talked about in the past, you've got to be multifaceted. You've got to be multi-talented. You've got to have multiple interests. So when one collapses or deviates, you can rely on other things to fill that gap or tide you over until you replace that gap. Whatever the case is, it's for you to shape. But if you've only got one thing to shape and you lose it, what are you shaping now? And so this title in my head of, I want to be another world champion, I suppose I could force it, but I don't feel like I need to now because I've moved through it and past it. And so that is another aspect on the title thing. If you cling too hard to a title, you may want to chase it irrespective of what the cost is, and the cost isn't worth what you're after. I can use my time now rather than forcing myself to be a world champion because of my stupid knee. I can take all of that time and maybe get 2 world championships and something else. And so that's the loose framework. Use your time wisely. Your titles, you can wrap your head around the idea that you're going to start losing them at some point, and you need other titles to fill in the blank. Otherwise, some men are left feeling like a shell of a man. And then what are they? If they're a shell, if they don't feel like they've got an identity, that's when things start going sideways. That's when things start going downhill, because they feel that they've got nothing to fortify their position. The one solid platform that they were standing on, no pun intended, is now gone. And now they're left in a liminal space with no solutions that they can easily slip in and cover the gap. They're trapped in that liminal space until they create a new solution. And if that liminal space goes on too long with no sense of identity, no sense of title, it can become really difficult for a lot of men. And so I'm curious if you guys have got any thoughts on that.
Let's go around the table again. Seb, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of want to focus on the first part of the message that or Sean was talking about there, and the amount of time, and I think that's a critical piece here as well. How long is it going to take you to pivot? And that's individual, and it really depends on a variety of different factors. But what we should aim to do is to try to have a turnaround time that's faster, right? Like all of us, try to work on ourselves so that the time that we spend sort of tactically repositioning, deciding where we're going and what we're doing and how we're going to pivot needs to be cut down if we can. And for me, when things go majorly wrong, generally, I'm giving myself a couple of days to completely soak in. Like, this sucks. I hate it. I want no part of this. Blah 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 for a couple of days, and then after that, it's that now we're going to work. How are we fixing that? Because the risk and the danger is to essentially start living through your thoughts. What it is that's occurring, that you want to come out of a certain situation, but you are thinking too much about certain things, and it makes you feel like you are doing, but you're not going anywhere. You're in the exact same spot looking around, and that's good. It's a positive and it's a step forward, but you need to start actioning items in order for your actions to keep up to your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Sorry, that's all. That's pretty much all I have on that.
Roger. Joey, thoughts on this?
Sorry, a little technical difficulty unmuting. Sean, I love what you said, and I want to kind of add on to that. People need to stop focusing on their titles. Don't focus on what you are, focus on who you are. And I see this a lot with cops. We've had a few cops that have had to medically retire, and that loss of identity and that title, that's what they were, that's what they did, that's what they knew. And then all of a sudden they're not a cop anymore. And I see this huge, sense of crisis of identity. And same thing with soldiers. You're part of a unit, you're connected. There's that esprit de corps and unit morale, and then you're out. And honestly, that's something that was one of the hangups for me of my decision to get out. Which, I mean, I'm just starting that process, and I'm hearing that it's a pretty lengthy process. But I signed up for the military at 18. And so I've, in some capacity or form, I've been wearing that uniform since 18. And this thought of, well, I'm not going to be in the military anymore. Like, what am I going to do? Granted, I'm a reservist, but it's something that has been a huge part of my life and has taken up a lot of my time. And it is a part of, my identity. But realizing what's important, especially now being a father, I've got a daughter who actually turned 18 months yesterday. And recognizing that my leadership role, the most important leadership I can do now, is to be a good father and to be present for everything. And I acknowledge that's kind of also like, that's a title, right? A father. But that's something I think that's a little more tangible, because in the military, you're going to rotate through units, you're going to rotate through command time and whatnot. And the army goes rolling along, but for my family, like, I am my wife's husband and I am my daughter's father. And again, that is a title too, but that's also a part of who I am, not what I am now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, you got any points on this?
I've got so many points on that, but I'll try to keep it short. Time isn't rushed, so you can't expect immediate healing. You can't expect immediate closure. You can't expect immediate answer. You may never get the answer that you want. Sometimes you can, but that's shifting your thinking. For me, and I'm going to speak on this, I appreciate what Sean said, and even with Seb, For me, it was a 19-year separation from 2 military enlistments. So I was a Marine and then was medically separated. And for 19 years, I tried to re-enlist. Well, the recruiters just played this game with me and never wanted to put my packet in. It took a long time. But I was always working towards something. I didn't know what that was. I was always exercising. I was going to, the gym and doing martial arts constantly. And I was not able to get in the military for 19 years. And so I was getting into street fights and bar fights because in my mind, that's what men do. You get out there. But I also threw myself into the chaos. And so for a moment, I think you have to walk away from reason for short periods of time and be the wild man, like, Robert Bly would say, or like Robert L. Moore, these guys who get in that masculine space. And I was really lost because my identity was a U.S. Marine. And I didn't know who I was, but I just knew that for me, I felt like I was a warrior. I was a man. I was someone who had this energy, but I didn't know where to put that energy. And so I was never taught. And it actually culminated in something really bad for me, which took me on a long journey, a decade-long journey of searching, which was a relative of mine. My mother was let out of jail. My business in Silicon Valley, I was fighting with my business partners, and that ended very badly. And then my ex left me. I was single again, and I really had to figure things out. This was trauma for me. Didn't have the skills to handle that, but I threw myself into the chaos, which was quite good, and I did everything wrong. I stopped running for about 8 years. I was drinking, I was fighting, and trying to figure out where did I put my energy. And it was only through backpacking through Europe, and a pretty bad situation happened. But I said, I've got to get back in the military. I've got to figure it out. I have all this energy and I have all this desire. What do I do? And I went through 8 recruiters. Now, 6 of them wasted my time. The 7th got the packet far enough. And what had happened was these people just didn't believe that I was going to make it. But the last recruiter pushed my packet all the way through. And I got a waiver. I got a doctor. I did all the training. And I was exceptionally fit. And as I said before, I was doing 4,000 pull-ups a month. I was doing thousands of push-ups a week. It was insane because I was overcompensating for the person I didn't like. I didn't like me. I didn't like myself. But they got my packet in and I re-enlisted at the age of 39. And I was in exceptional shape. I mean, I was so good at what I was doing, running, anything, what it was. But then it was hard for me because I had to separate. I had a wife and 3 kids, and I was going into special forces. And my wife said, I'll support you. And I said, I don't want a 16-year-old daughter at Fort Bragg. That's not what I want. I don't want my kids here. I have this family. I said, we've got to make a decision. And so I left. And that was even harder because leaving was something I had spent 19 years trying to do. And so when I left, I spent 3 years in therapy, dealing with trauma, dealing with a lot of things that had nothing to do with the military, but had to do with the way I saw the world, trauma from childhood, wounds, mother wounds, father wounds, and those kinds of things. And I recommend that, but you have to have an end goal. You have to have some type of end state. But as I said before, time is not rushed. Do not expect immediate healing. Do not expect an immediate answer. Sometimes you have to walk away from reason and believe in something metaphysical or supernatural, something in the sense that it makes no sense. You maybe have an inkling of it. And it's only until you drive into the source of that pain that it becomes very apparent of the direction you should be going. And for me, that was that I had always done the work, even with that 8-year period of not exercising or working out. But when I really look back, I said, my gosh, I've been disciplined for almost 19 years.
It's an interesting line of thought here too, because a lot of times when I exited the military, I was a master corporal. I thought I knew what I was doing, and I had a brand new baby, 5-month-old son, and I was getting out of the Army, and I'm like, okay, now what? And I had no plan. I had nothing. But to that point is there's so much that can be applied from a life of discipline or from a life of seeking adversity that you can then apply to new adversity. And so I'm wondering from your guys' history and your backstories in that, was there any one moment where like you got knocked to your knees and then said, okay, I got to rethink where I'm going? Like Mike, you kind of went through that on your own, but for Joey, Seb, Sean, did you guys run through a system like that where you had to like really reassess at your core values? How do I even start from here? Joey, what do you think?
For me, I'd say that getting knocked to my knees moment, I was at the point where I had already kind of developed those core values. And my personal mantra for the last few years, probably the last 4 years, is when I came up with this, but strong body, resilient mind, household filled with laughter and love. And so when this was happening, and it's it's a crazy story. I'm not going to get into it, but the possibility of having to do something else and figure all that out. Yeah, it was concerning. But knowing that I had those core values, knowing that I had the support of my family, and that ultimately it was going to work out. I would make it work out, and thankfully I had support from all kinds of different people. And obviously, it didn't go the way that it could have gone, which would have been poor for me. But having those core values as it was happening, being able to lean on that and know that, hey, it's gonna work out. And I forget who it was, but someone had brought up like the resilience piece. Resilience needs to be deliberate, and self discipline is a perishable skill. And so as these things are happening, as you face them, that is helping you become more resilient. And when you are cognizant of that and conscious of what's happening and deliberate about saying like, hey, this sucks and I'm going to fight my way through it, that in and of itself helps you become more resilient and helps you become stronger.
Absolutely. Seb, thoughts on this?
Yeah, there hasn't been, that many times where I was brought down to my knees, where I was sort of, what's the word, sort of at a loss, but it has happened. And one of those times was 2021, following my injury, and shortly after, I had a person I was in a relationship with depart, right? And that's always been my Achilles heel a bit. I tend to go all in relationships, and sometimes that means forgetting myself and really loving hard. And there's nothing wrong with loving hard, but there has to be some boundaries there, and there has to be a little bit of detachment, which I didn't have at the time. So, and I had a daughter that was self-harming at the same time. So it was, dealing with a self-harming daughter, the prospect of losing my leg, and having all these medical issues with what was going on there, and a 10-year relationship coming to an abrupt halt without really any closure whatsoever, which I, longed for quite some time. And I do believe that this ties right into what Mike was talking about earlier. And essentially what I did is I went into exploration, because I think the worst thing you can do is to sit there and soak. And the best thing you can do is to do the things you absolutely don't want to do. That includes taking care of yourself. That includes going to train. That includes reading and doing all of the things and engaging with your friends and your social circle and all of this good stuff. And sometimes it was the complete opposite. I wanted to just turtle up in a corner and just go to sleep and wake up, 6 months later, fixed. But it just won't happen. And so I cannot stress this enough. And we said it in different ways, Mike and I, but really going into exploration is the key to absolutely anything that comes down the pipe. When you lose your bearing to the point where you don't know where you're going, you have to make some moves. You just have to. It's almost like getting off the X. I don't even care what attacks you in what formation or whatever. Just get off the X. Do something so that you can stimulate a reaction in yourself and have some sort of clarity come upon you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, thoughts on this?
Well, brought to my knees is a strong word, but maybe I've come close. The one moment that comes to mind is this. So I'd left Tier 1 I'd left Tier 1 Special Operations and spent nearly the year at the Ontario Police College as a use of force instructor. Then I went back to school to become a computer system engineer. A while later, I found myself teaching day classes 9 till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then teaching night class from 6 o'clock until 10 o'clock at night, and then going back to my little fancy boy condo and writing a book. So I'd write until about 3 o'clock in the morning, get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, start writing my lesson plans for the day, because of course I had to design all of my own courses from scratch. And so it was a hard period of time where there's many things going on. I'm reasonably intelligent, but my jobs prior to that hadn't been hardcore academic, and I was now in a hardcore academic role. So I was still calibrating to that. And I was under a lot of pressure and time constraints based on my workload. And so I was starting to sizzle at the edges. I was starting to burn out a little bit. And so it was coming up on midnight on New Year's Eve. And I was again in my my fancy boy place, all by myself, at a big desk, writing my book. 10-second countdown. Dick Clark is on my big screen, off to my right flank. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. That's what I did. I celebrated for 5 seconds, maximum 5 seconds for New Year's Eve, all by myself, with no one aware of the freaking hellacious pace that I was setting for myself and for my students. And so there's a lot of things going on there. I'd just come out of a team that was like, I mean, they felt like your own blood. Like it was literally brothers in arms, like your own brothers. All of a sudden, they're all gone. I had a wife. I lost that to the teams. So now I'm a solo dude on New Year's Eve working 29 hours in a 24-hour cycle every freaking day, like a lunatic. And it was a countdown by Dick Clark that made me do this. Oh man, something's got to change. Once I'm done this book, I'm changing something. And so, book done. I walked into the office of the owner of the school that I was teaching at and said, "This is my last class. I won't teach anymore after this. You've had your warning. I'm bouncing after this." And so I did. I held up my responsibilities, and the moment that they were done, I pivoted. And what did I do? I had to reinvent myself. How did I do it? I bought a freaking mountain bike without a plan. I had no idea what I was going to do with a mountain bike other than I'm going to buy a bike. I'm going to start riding it. I'll figure it out and it'll be good for me. So that bike, of course, took me many places over many years. And the other aspect was I switched careers completely from hardcore nerdery to one of my old bosses approached me and said, "Hey, how'd you feel about getting back into the game of private international security consulting?" And I said, "Yes, I will." And so I spent a few years doing that. So it was a completely different career shift, and it was a completely different personal life shift. I gave myself more time to have more fun, pursuing something that I knew next to nothing about, with a goal to be the best that I could be in it. No idea that I would be a world champion one day, but knew that I was going to pursue. And the career that I entered into, international security consulting, took me around the world doing all kinds of interesting things. And by the way, because of that freaking job, I met my wife in a Peruvian airport while I was flying in from Italy and she was flying in from Canada. She just happened to see the kind of pants I was wearing, Canadian pants, and came over and said, "Hi, are you a Canadian?" As I've said in the past, my son, my oldest son, Evan, occasionally jokes with the idea that, if Dad would have been wearing a pair of Levi pants that day, we wouldn't have been born, because my wife wouldn't have seen that I was wearing a pair of Mountain Equipment Co-op pants. And that's the truth of the matter, man. That is the truth. So, to wrap it all up, when I was down on my knees in the hurt locker, if I can call it that, what I did was I recreated myself in a radically different professional career direction. and I recreated myself in a radically different personal direction. I opened myself up to the adventure of the world, met my wife, and started a new life. And so, where can it take you? Well, it took me in good directions, but it isn't a casual happenstance. It just happened, bro. All of it was shaped along the way. And you don't know that until you look backwards and realize that every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year, I've been hammering on creating the outcome that I've got right now. Sometimes doing it wrong, sometimes doing it right, but always freaking hammering on trying to produce a better life, not just for myself, but for those around me.
Yeah, that is it's one of those moments. Now I'm wondering, on that note, we're talking about like rebuilding a life or reinvigorating your own psyche into all kinds of new things. And when we started this conversation, we kind of talked about having, linear things working towards. So you have, if you're police officers, well, you also are this, and you're also this. You're not all just one title. But how often do you think it is necessary, or do you think it is necessary, to have a complete rebuild? Like, go to the foundations. Okay, I got to strip everything away and start over, because there are times that that's necessary. At least for myself, psychologically, I had to go way back when I was going through all my struggles and dealing with my therapist and working with horses and all these other things. I had to strip myself to the bone and then start building from there. Do you think that that is required for some people, or do you think that that is it's due to the happenstance that I wasn't controlling my outcomes prior to that I then had to strip it all away? What do you guys think? Mike, I'm going to come to you first.
Thanks. Well, going back to my own life, and I'll try to answer the question, is actually remember the time I was knocked down to my knees. That was the day Princess Diana died. It was all over the news. And I got on my knees and said, I cannot do this again. I mean, the confluence of the things, which was, fighting with my business partner and, my girlfriend leaving me. And I had put my sense of value in a woman, which that was in a sense my God, right? And then I was a materialist. So because I couldn't get back to service, I was doing things like spending lots of money on clothes. I mean, I was a very shallow person. I was not a deep thinker. I was not profound in any way. I had a Porsche Carrera C4 911. I remember cloud silver, gorgeous. I gave that away. I began to dump things. People said, "Are you suicidal? Are you going to give everything away?" I said, "No, I'm sick of the materialism here. I'm sick of the life I've chosen, which is this nightclub kind of culture. This nothing." But at that same time, there was a newspaper article, and I didn't know who this person was. And I said, "Who is this guy?" And I read it, and it was a obituary on Viktor Frankl. And I said, "Viktor Frankl." Well, he had died 97, same time when this confluence of things happened. And he said basically that between stimulus and response, there's a space, and that space is our power to choose our response. And our response lies our growth and our freedom. So I picked up the book, Man's Search for Meaning, and that was very impactful to me. And I realized that I could not change the situation, but I was challenged to change myself. And I just said, I'm going to change. And I did that. So no, I wasn't suicidal. I wasn't going to give away all my stuff just to go and, go off into the sunset. But I began to make the changes. Now, going back to what Sean said, you don't always know until you look back. And it wasn't until my second military separation when I was sitting on the sofa with Dr. Stephen Band. So Steve Band was the FBI's chief of the Behavioral Science Division. So he created the BOT group, and these guys tracked down serial killers and pedophiles, et cetera. Sat down there on his desk and went there for 3 years, became a very close family friend. But he also wrote the foreword to two of my books. But as I was going through the trauma, and I just remember the tears coming out of my eyes, my wife sitting on this sofa saying, "This guy's lost his freaking mind," because I was blasting myself in the face and raging. And he said, "Mike, you're scaring the other patients in the other rooms." But I just had to come to grips with everything I'd held inside, this pain for 20 odd years and this trauma. So do you need to rebuild? Is it a constant thing? Absolutely. You should always reassess. And I think sometimes you can't always be aware that you need to. but it comes upon you. For example, you get closer to retirement and then you begin to realize some of your friends are passing away, or that they don't think any longer like you, or maybe they're not maturing like you. Maybe they're kind of stuck. And so you have to reassess, you have to reframe and refocus and say, are my thoughts and my emotions still in alignment with my core values? And they may not be. And you need a mentor like Dr. Band, who helped me get through the trauma and helped me understand what I was going through. And you find these mentors or mentors, and guys like you, iron sharpens iron. You find other guys who think similarly or differently, but you always welcome the challenges. You reject the easy pleasures. You walk away from reason for short periods of time, and you feel whatever you're feeling, feel that pain. And then after you do that, you say, hey, what's next? And you welcome the unknown. And that's it. It's just you welcome the unknown. You don't know what's out there, but you remove the anxiety of the future because you have this attitude of whatever happens, happens. That's my thought.
I like it. Joey, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I like what Mike said about the space to react quote. And it kind of reminds me of the Marcus Aurelius quote. And I think it's something to the effect of, like, you say, it's unfortunate that this happened. No, it's fortunate that it happened and I'm unharmed by it. I think that's an incredibly powerful thing, just being able to regulate how you're reacting to things that happen. And to Mike's point, yeah, it is a constant evaluation. So do you need to completely tear yourself all the way down to the bone to rebuild? No. I mean, there are huge incidents and events that happen that make us do that sometimes for some people. And obviously there are some people that happens and that's what breaks them and they are irreparable after that. One of the things that I think is incredibly helpful for doing that constant evaluation is journaling. So for me personally, I journal. I don't do it every night anymore. I was doing it every night and I was pretty good about that. But I do it with a fountain pen in cursive. And in part, that's because it's like the zen of doing that, of forcing yourself to slow down and focus on your penmanship. That in and of itself is actually super helpful, just to kind of like calm you and get all that out. But also, it's a really good way to reflect, to do your own little AAR at the end of the day. What went well? What was supposed to happen? What'd you screw up? What are you going to do differently? And there's a million different ways you can journal, whether you want to use prompts, whether you just want to write, just let the thoughts flow. But that's something that assists you with that evaluation and helps you, if you do that right before bed, then when you wake up, you have that opportunity to kind of think on what you're going to do that day differently, because you wrote about it the night before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally have the Stoic journal that gives me prompts, it's great. I really enjoy that one. But journaling is fantastic. Seb, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can definitely see a time where somebody would have a complete rebuild on their hand. Especially it's directly proportionate to how much of yourself you constructed with something that wasn't real. That's something that was an illusion, or that, and this is not done obviously sort of willfully. This is done subconsciously in a lot of ways. But if you wake up one day and you are not the man you want to be, then you have not done the things you should have done to be the man you want to be. And if that's the case, and it starts at the foundation, you may have to strip everything down, because ultimately your core values and the foundation of that process is going to follow you anywhere you go. But if the foundation is cracked, I don't care the quality of work that you're putting on top, you're going to end up with a Pisa tower. And I don't care what they say, one day that thing's going to fall. We know that.
100%.
And so I think it's really important. And again, Mike, Joey, and Sean all spoke to the same thing, which is the concept of introspection. And that is a critical piece of that equation. A lot of people will not change until they hit rock bottom. And that's okay too, because sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to see which one of the hearts is more beneficial to you. And you start reallocating the energy, where your need to change becomes greater than the fear that's associated with taking the steps that you need to take to change. And sometimes in order for that to happen, it needs to hit hard. But, all of this it taken in stride. When I got hit hard in my life, like real hard, when I'm thinking this is savage, it just gives you an incredible opportunity to step up for yourself and change things all around. It gives you that opportunity. It's a blessing. It's an opportunity that you have to really start exploring, to really question everything, to really look inwards and outwards, and who are you surrounded with? All of those things, reevaluate it, your entire set of circumstances, and do something that changes you drastically.
I like that a lot. Sean, thoughts on this?
Yeah, a few. So just building off of what Seb just said, if something hits you hard and you've got to pivot and you've got to commit to something to make the changes to improve yourself, well, first of all, you've got to decide the right thing to make the change on, and then you've got to decide what velocity you want to commit to that, and you've got to have that velocity directed at a potential future visualized outcome. So it's not just a case of, you get dropped to your knees and then you kind of look at your watch and say, it's 1 second has gone by, and now it's time for me to reinvent myself, and that should be done by the end of the day. That's not how it works. And so, Chance, you'd asked the question, or you posited that you had to take yourself almost down to ground zero again, or down to the bare bones of who Chance Burles is, because perhaps you needed to relearn who Chance Burles is. And so I think that there's how that process works is based on who you are. And so if you're a kind of person who lies to yourself or is surrounded by people who lie to you, you're going to have a freaking hard ride, man, ahead of you. But if you keep it real with yourself, or you surround yourself with people who keep it real with you, it's not as hard when you start from ground zero again, or from bare bones again. Because the dissonance between who you think you are and who you really are is two different states in those two different examples. If I'm someone's friend, guaranteed they're hearing from me on a pretty regular basis as to who they are in this moment. Like if you're screwing up, you'll know from me. I'll let you know without a doubt. And if you're doing good, I'll let you know. So if you're hanging out with me, you'll get a good read on what I think is going on. But that doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that you're getting a good read from me. I'll be honest with you. But if you're surrounding yourself with people who will enable you in your nonsense, well, the moment that you drop to your knees and have to reinvent yourself, who you think you are, and who you've been told by all of your bro-images that have been lying to you as well, wow, that's an eye-opening moment where you get to face who you really are, not who you think you are. And so none of this is an ambush, man. None of it. You're honest with yourself, and you surround yourself with honest people. That doesn't mean that they got to be jerks or mean-spirited. It just means that when you want to get a good read on how you're doing, connect with a bro-hemo who tells you it straight up. Like if I want to know if I'm screwing up, I hit up Seb. And if he says I'm screwing up, it's time for me to make adjustments. And so it's for us to be honest with ourselves and surround ourselves with honest people.
I really like that. And, understanding your crew, understanding the people that you spend time with, understanding, I'd say not even just the people you spend time with, but the environment in which you spend your time applies considerably to how you live your life and how you develop from those bare bones moments where you get either dropped to your knees or you have to strip away everything just to see the problem. I mean, I have in my other room in the basement here, I had to strip my walls off, took the drywall out, found water. Why is there water here? And to follow that that thought process, I eventually found a crack in my foundation. Now I'm fixing it. Now I'm working on it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But had I just kind of been like, oh, well, I guess the baseboards are wet. Well, that sucks, right? I would have never found what I need to find to actually fix the problem. I would just be constantly dealing with whatever the symptoms are in the moment. I think that's such a critical point. Do you guys have any, I guess, let's say tips for people that are just now realizing, oh man, my circle is jacked up. Like I should not be hanging out with these people, or they're starting to realize that, people aren't being honest with them, or it's not, their life is not turning out the way they thought it was based on, their surroundings. What tips would you have for those people to better themselves or get themselves out of that position? Joey, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
It's going to be a little bit counterintuitive just because I'm always complaining about the ills of social media. But the beauty of social media is that you are able to really curate your circle. And some of my closest mentors who have helped me a ton, like in my journey as a shooter and as an instructor and the different roles I take at my PD, are people that I've never actually met in real life, but I talk to daily. And I've made these connections through social media. And the beauty of social media is that it is a little bit of a self-selecting process where if you're coming across people, they tend to have similar interests to you, and they tend to have a similar mindset. So don't use social media for just mindless scrolling and, checking out whatever random shenanigans. Use it deliberately as a tool to help you grow and pick your circles. And you'd be surprised the amount of people that are on social media that are doing it because they want to spread a certain message. And that's exactly what you're doing with this. But there are so many people out there who just want to see other people winning and want to see other people succeeding. And like when I run police post training, and I get people telling me about, their application process and, oh, they're hired and now they're on FTO, now they're solo, and oh, they made their first big felony arrest. That's one of the things that brings me the most joy in everything I do, is that this random person that I've connected with and had this like 2-year long back and forth as they've been updating me on this, now I love seeing people doing these great things. And there are tons of people that are like that just want to connect with people, with like-minded people, and see other people succeed. And there's a little bit of a risk of, what you see on social media is not real, right? And so I say what I just said with the caution and the caveat of choose wisely.
I like that a lot. Mike, thoughts on this?
Well, going back to what Joey said, I absolutely agree about journaling. So when the way I got started was I had some skills and I said, hey, I can shoot, I can run, I can do this. And so I started blogging. That blog became spotup.com, which became an industry blog, which is known companies like 511 or whomever, new companies like Warbird send me tactical gear, hey, to review stuff. That opened up the portal for me to bring on writers. And, there's guys who are SWAT and Recon and Delta and whatever. They come on to Spotter Up and they get gear and they write about it, but they also contribute. And, they talk about fighting or running or fitness or nutrition or combat. So through that blog, it was just my hobby. I started to meet a lot of really amazing people who had skill sets, who had perspectives so different from me, and thought contrarily in some ways. But they were people that I really could connect with. And so I believe that you should journal. As far as social media, I was journaling on Instagram, didn't even know what Instagram was, but I started just writing my thoughts. And those thoughts, every single post became my book. People said, you should write a book. I said, I don't know if this is worthwhile, but people are saying I'm getting some benefit out of that. So I took every single post and I reformatted it and put it into a devotional for people. It's a devotional reader. It's non-religious in the sense you can just read it and say, hey, I got something out of that. So, but also what Joey's saying is, you find amazing people. And I found that some of the greatest people are on Instagram, like Mike Green, Green Ops, 20 Special Forces Group. But Mike is the nicest guy I've ever met. I said, he is really interested in other people. One big name influencer, he said that making money is a new form of manly hunting. And I thought that's just nonsense. So when you're out there and you're finding people, find out what their background is, what they're into, and are they out there just to make a name for themselves and become famous? Or are they people who actually care about you? Now, as for kind of things that you can go after is don't aim at success. because the more you aim at success, you make it a target, and you're going to miss that target. Now you can say, okay, I'm going to graduate from college, or my success is to get that girl, his phone number, or I'm going to get that job. That's fine. Those are tangible things. But success is your being. I said before, do not live by your titles, but live by your being. Don't aim at success. Success, it's always going to be some nebulous thing out there. You could pursue it, but there are side effects. It's a side effect of your dedication to you wanting to improve yourself. That's a side effect of that dedication to you getting out there and being disciplined. So my thought on that is, and I've shifted dramatically. New friends I have, and I've griped to my brother about it. I said, I've had friends 30, 40 years I no longer speak with. They don't want to speak to me. And simply because they're fixated on the barstool stories. They want to sit in the bar, want to tell the same war stories over and over again. And they don't want to read any books, and they don't want to see any movies, and they don't want to have dialogue. They don't want to do anything, but I do, because I don't know everything. So my thought is, don't make success your target. The second is to admit that you don't know everything. I remember reading a book on philosophy, and it just hurt my head. It was on mathematics, and I said, boy, I got to be dumb. I cannot figure this out. There was a ceiling, and I began to realize I am not as bright as I thought. And so you have to admit that you don't know everything and ask for help. And you can admit that you don't know anything and you can ask for help. That's humility. And I do that a lot. I have mentors. I have people who are older than me, who are in their 80s, and I have people in their 20s, and I go to and I bounce thoughts off. But I mean, those are the first three, I think, is just don't make success your target. Constantly evolve by being humble and asking for help, and surround yourself with mentors.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are three fantastic points. Seb, thoughts on this?
Yeah, lots of good stuff. I mean, I tend to focus on meaning, because success is a shifting goalpost, right? And it keeps on, depending what angle you're looking at and what your next priority is, you could always argue that you weren't as successful as you wanted to be. And it's just no end in sight. And it's that constant, struggling to try to keep up, or struggling to try to do something that gives you meaning. And if you're surrounded with the right people and you're pursuing something that gives you meaning and something that you can do incrementally and invest in the process, and the success piece becomes a byproduct of that, or a symptomology of that, is a lot more achievable. With that, you're also less time constrained. You're not looking at it going, I'm still not at the goal. And so what can happen, and what does happen with people, is that they're so fixated and obsessed with a certain outcome that they missed a 10-year period of their life. Like, they wake up one morning and, it's kind of like you driving somewhere, and you get to a location and you're like, I haven't seen any of that drive. And one day you return on the same drive and you're in the passenger seat and somebody else is driving, and you're looking around and you're like, this place is beautiful. It's amazing, and that's the key to this life. This life isn't a destination. And as tacky as it sounds, we still treat it like that. We still treat it like somehow it's going to be X, Y, and Z when I get to this next thing, and then this next thing, and then all of this. And what doesn't happen in between is the appreciation for what you have and what you are currently doing, what you're engaged in, the process, all of this. Which will bring you a lot of reward once you reach whatever goal you had set forth for yourself. But when you look back, if I was to take a book with all of the steps and all of the setbacks and all of the things that you would encounter, and said to you, are you ready to start that again? You would go, hell no. I don't want to do that again, and I would not do it again. And if you knew all that you were going to face, you probably wouldn't have gauged it in the first place. But that's the beauty of it. It's not about that. It's about making the decision on the daily. It's about taking the daily steps. It's about going in a direction that's conducive to, whatever gives meaning to your life. And so, there's a lot of exploration here, and it comes full circle again, because it's going to happen. You're going to have to launch into Indiana Jones mode and figure out what it is that brings you that sense of peace, that sense of inner peace, and that meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, thoughts?
So Mike had said something that I think is interesting, just to make the point as to it's not just one dimensional, or it's not just a single point of objection where If you pick up a book and you start reading it and you tell yourself, man, I thought what? I'm not smart enough for this book. If that's what you think, that's good. It's good to know your limits. But conversely, you can pick up that book and think, man, I think this looks kind of tough. And by the end of it, you're saying to yourself, that was easy peasy lemon squeezy. And so you don't know what you don't know until you start pushing up against the edges to try to understand your edges. I've picked up books that I thought would bewilder me. And at the end of it, I think to myself, I could have written that better. Conversely, I picked up books that should have been easy, and I'm still working my way through them, scratching my head and being puzzled. And so that is the unique human experience. What Mike thinks is difficult, I might think is easy. And what I think is difficult, he might think is easy. That's the beauty of life. So if you've got a group of friends that are surrounding you and they're all struggling with a book, that doesn't mean that you're struggling with the book before you read the book. Freaking read the book. See how it plays out for you. And then if it's easy, hit up your brohemos and say, well, why did you struggle with it? I'm trying to figure out how I understood it and you didn't. What is it? Did I misunderstand it? It's the why of things that interest me. Why did I find it easy and why did you find it difficult? And if I found it easy, did I do it wrong? Because just by the very thought of, oh, that was easy, doesn't mean it was right. Doesn't mean it was easy. So that's just my thought on what Mike had to say. It's not as one-dimensional. I know he wasn't putting it out as one-dimensional, but I don't want anyone out there to hear it as just a singular one-dimensional point. The other piece is, as Seb was saying, and Seb knows this as well as I do, you've got to do things on the daily. You really do. You've got to be disciplined. You've got to be focused. You've got to execute on a 24-hour cycle. Forget about the long game sometimes and just do the work. Or sometimes focus on the long game and the daily work will disappear. However, you've got to do it, and that's an ebb and flow thing throughout your life. However, you've got to shift that focus to get things done. That's for you to do. But it shouldn't feel like homework. And so when Seb was saying, look, you've got to do everything that you've got to do every day, it's got to be done. That is true. But some people hear that and they think, oh no, I got to do homework? This sounds like work. Well, I got to do that again tomorrow? Well, if that's your spin, that's your inner voice saying, oh no, today has to be done again tomorrow. Versus the other voice, which is, freaking bring it, baby. I just smashed on today. Can't wait to smash on tomorrow. That's all we've got. The inner dialogue that we tell ourselves on this life. The external world that we're executing against, we're either going to execute or we're not going to execute. But the inner world is where it all goes down or it all goes up. And so you have to control your inner narrative. Don't ever say to yourself, man, it is such a drag trying to improve myself every day. That should never be said in the history of mankind, but it is. And that dialogue needs to change.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And to that point, what do you got, Seb?
Oh, sorry, I just unmuted myself there. Just one quick thing. If you make another jiu-jitsu analogy, because I just love that, is when people approach me and they're like, how long does it take to have a black belt? I'm like, I don't know how long it's going to take you to have a black belt or if you'll ever get there, but I can tell you this, it will take you one day to be better than today. And that's tomorrow and the day after, right? And so I think even to look at engaging in a process as if we somehow repeat it and it was Groundhog Day, it isn't Groundhog Day. No man steps in the same river twice, for you are not the same man it is in the same river. Well, there's a reason why that's being said. And so every day that you invest in you, you're a different person. And if you're doing it correctly, you're a better person. So today isn't an effort because there's motivation there because you're going somewhere. Even if you don't feel you necessarily or are not fully aware that you are. If you put in the work, then things will unfold as they should.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a buddy of mine actually give probably the best answer I've heard for that when somebody said, "How long does it take to get a black belt?" And he was like, "As long as it takes." And that's all there is to it. Now, I got some questions here from the Peanut Gallery, and I wanted to hit these because they're right in line with what we're talking about right now. So Tanya jumped on here and she said, "How did you all train to tolerate volatility professionally? And what modifications, if any, did you make when applying it to the rest of your life?" And I think this is the key. The crux of it is the application of professional skill sets to the rest of your life. So let's hear it. Mike, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
So question is, how did you train to tolerate volatility professionally? So if I understand the question, it's change in career. And I think if I understand the question correctly, and what kind of modification. So it's change in career. It's simply you have, again, the things that you already know. You're not fearful of anything. You become wiser because you've done it over and over. I mean, if you've been a machinist or whatever, there are still the same applications, right? Or you're a plumber, or you're a soldier. All of that is still the same. You show up for work on time. You create networks. You work for a good goal. You don't work for money, because that's really essentially meaningless. And it was again, it was Frankel. He talked about, no, was it Frankel? I think it was biographies. A biography could be very long, but there's no substance in there. There's nothing. It doesn't matter how high and low you went up in the career. And I've shifted careers many, many times. I can talk about that. I've had 4 businesses, 3 that failed, 1 that was successful. I was a soldier. I was an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. I was unemployed for 2 years. I lived off credit cards. So you never give up hope. That's the thing. You take responsibility out of the disorder, and you say there's an end goal. You look back at the past as well, to your ancestors or people that you know, or history, and history will tell you people survived. Unless this is the potato famine, you're going to make it. I mean, we're in a day and age now that you have resources. You can go down there and you can learn to type, or you can learn to program, or you can learn to code. You can learn so much. So you don't want to be limited by the profession. As Sean had said, he's learning something completely different, and you're going a different direction, right? So if I understand the question correctly, it's just that you train to be good at being a human being. And what is that? It seems so vague, but it is really to be thoughtful and impactful. Speak up when you need to speak up. Be creative, and share with your bosses or whomever's out there that will listen. And then build those allies in the workspace, people who believe in you. And I've had that, where one boss rejects what you say, but you go to someone else and sell your POV, and they say, "Wow, that's kind of cool. Let's promote that." So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost like playing when kids are like, "Oh, let's ask dad." "Oh, he said no. Let's ask mom." Sometimes that's how it works. Joey, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the question is kind of a singular thing, and I like how Mike kind of phrased it. Focusing on your own development, one as a person, and having the right skill sets and mindset, knowing that you will be successful in whatever you decide to do. And so when you start with those core foundations, and you take that solid human being, you can apply that to anything professionally. So like why have I been successful at the things I've done? It's because I care about people. It's because I listen to people. I admit when I'm wrong. And I'm constantly looking for ways to develop and grow. That is not applicable only to being a cop or being an army officer or a company commander or whatever. Those are the type of things that, anyone would want in an employee, or a business partner. And just having that start with that foundation, and then that's what allows you to apply that to anything professionally or in your personal life, as a parent or as a spouse.
Absolutely. Seb, thoughts on this?
The question is, what is the cost of intolerance? Because that's going to lead you straight to nowhere and be very costly. And so for me, I kind of look at it this way, and I have these conversations with people all the time, whether they're law enforcement veteran or military veteran or people that even, were doing something and let that something define them until a time where they couldn't anymore, and now they don't know, they're lost, and this is the man I used to be, and all of those concepts. Nothing is lost, nothing disappears, everything just transforms. And so you're not going anywhere. This is you bringing into your next endeavor all of the skills and the fundamental things that you've developed doing the thing that you were doing, that you were so proud of, that you were attached to. It's not leaving you, it's coming with you. Like, what is that thing about I'm leaving this behind, and say my military service is behind me and I used to be something, and now, man, you wouldn't be walking and talking the way you are, you wouldn't be acting the way you are if you didn't have that. And so I think that's an important concept, and teaching people to bridge things over in a non-direct way. So, for example, if you are looking at what the prospect of you doing a certain job or changing careers or doing whatever, instead of looking at direct skill application, like I can take my infantry skills and my advanced to contact skills and, do this, look at it broadly. What are the fundamental skills needed from from somebody that's doing advanced to contact, all of those things. Well, those things are going to be incredibly valuable when you apply in a business context, but you need to have the ability to not look at a picture that's clearly painted. It's art, really, when it comes down to it. You need to see whatever it is that you need to see, so that you personally understand how you can segue into something else with the skills, knowledge, and abilities that you've acquired over years of doing something. So instead of seeing it as you leaving it behind, why don't you see it as you transforming it and bring it and elevating it?
Absolutely. Sean, thoughts on this? Oh, you're muted, bud. Still muted.
I'm
There
going
we
to
go.
focus on the 3 words: tolerate volatility professionally. I'm going to use a prop, which I didn't plan to. So if that's your bandwidth of adversity in your life versus that bandwidth of adversity in your life, you're a far more capable person with that bandwidth, the ability to absorb adversity. So, effectively, what I'm speaking to is anti-fragility. If you haven't faced enough adversity, you are fragile, versus someone who's faced a lot of adversity, they are not fragile. So those are like big, bold statements. They're just big generalizations. I'm just setting the stage for the fact that if you've been raised in a bubble, a big safety, a big coddling blanket that keeps you warm 24/7 for your entire life, you're fragile. But if you were raised in a ditch and it rained 27 hours out of every 24 hours for the rest of your life, you're not fragile. And so the fragile person versus the less fragile person, this person over here is always going to do better professionally if they're not fragile. And the less fragile you are, the better you are in whatever capacity you're acting in as a human being, professionally, at home, in your sport, in the restaurant, wherever you are. If you're a one-dimensional fragile person, you struggle to operate in any environment, whether it's the workplace or not. If you've had your ass kicked all over the planet and you've done a little bit of ass kicking yourself, you're not fragile. And so whether you're in the workplace or at home, you're better suited to dealing with the intricacies of life. So how to train to become better at work, to become better at home, to become better in the restaurant? Go freaking do hard things. Solve the problems. Get dehydrated from crying. Just go hard, screw up, get a few scabs on your knees, bleed, sweat, tears, period. Repeat. And so eventually you're less fragile. And eventually you're more capable. And eventually you'll understand that there is no little course that a person can take. There is no little document that you can hang on your wall that states you're anti-fragile. There's only one way to do it, and it's to go out into the external world and get your ass kicked.
Yeah, it is. You never learn quite as much from a normal day that you do from an ass kicking. That is 100% sure. Now I have that video. If you want, Sean, you want me to put it up? All right, let's hit this. So I want you guys to watch this, and then I'm going to get your guys' thoughts on it because it goes to exactly what we're talking about. Here we go.
People with very high expectations have very low resilience. And unfortunately, resilience matters in success. I don't know how to teach it to you except for I hope suffering happens to you. And I was fortunate that I grew up with my parents providing a condition for us to be successful on the one hand, but there were plenty of opportunities for setbacks and suffering. And to this day, I use the phrase pain and suffering inside our company with great glee. And the reason, and I mean that, boy, this is going to cause a lot of pain and suffering. And I mean that in a happy way, because you want to train, you want to refine the character of your company. You want greatness out of them. And greatness is not intelligence. Greatness comes from character, and character is informed out of smart people. It's formed out of people who suffered.
Bam. Seb, thoughts on this? Yeah, mic drop for sure.
Yeah, that was quite the mic drop moment, and I absolutely embraced that. I think that the best thing that can happen to someone is to be regularly tested. I'm not suggesting that you should be brought down to your knees every year, every 6 months or whatever, because obviously, that's going to take its toll the way it does. But if there is an opportunity to consistently be faced with a degree of adversity, that is an absolute blessing. And I think we've spoken about this before extensively, even with the kids, and parents being a certain way, and they were successful in their life and they achieved certain things, often greatness perhaps. And then they look back at their kids and they're like, okay, all of the things that I struggled through, I'm going to spare it to the kids and they'll turn just as good as me. And it just doesn't add up. It doesn't work. You can't be doing that. So it becomes a question of how much adversity will you monitor and how much will you allow them to negotiate on their own type deal and provide them guidance, be there, all this good stuff. But man, adversity is a blessing. It legitimately is. And if you take it as that, you're not trying to remove suffering from your life, which is an absolutely asinine pursuit. You will never get to that. It's impossible. It will always happen. And so once you start shifting that mindset, it's like the next thing's coming. It's just a matter of rolling with the punches, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Joey, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I like some of the stuff Sean brought up, and I encourage everyone to read the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. There's a lot of themes and topics that overlap there. One of the things I do want to bring up, the concept of challenge and struggle. That's part of human existence. And if you never face challenge and you never overcome adversity, you're never going to have anything to be proud of. And that's part of what makes us human and part of what makes stories great. And so our SWAT team's motto is actually strength rejoices in the challenge. And I love that. And there's another saying I've heard, pressure is a privilege. Looking at the different things, like sometimes, honestly, if things are going too well, you need to find a way to create challenges for you to overcome, whether that's some type of like physical thing. Like that's why the gym is so great. That's why people that are working out all the time have, as a general statement, better mental health, because you are constantly subjecting yourself to a physical strenuous challenge and you reap the benefits of undergoing that. And we can't expect a life that there will be no pain, no suffering, no challenges, because ultimately that's just a meaningless existence. You're not doing anything. You're just living in a bubble.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, thoughts on this?
Well, one of the things I tell people all the time is not to have mental, spiritual, emotional myopia. You cannot, or even farsightedness, you cannot see what's good in front of you. And you're always fixated on the future, and you cannot see what's good in front of you, like your wife or your kids or something. Or, I tell people, do not be embittered. You need to forgive yourself for the failures and move on. And you need to forgive others for their failures to you, the hurts that they did. And you don't want to be stuck in that embittered status, because you cannot see what's good ahead. You cannot see that you can succeed. And the thing about being resilient, it's like a skill, right? So, you believe, regardless of what happens, that you can influence life events, and that you find purpose in that turmoil. And then you have this conviction that you can learn from what was positive and negative. I think about this commander who was chewing out this Navy SEAL, and there's a storm. I heard the story, and he said he was out there swimming in the storm, and the commander said, you're going to get written up for doing this. And the guy said, no, Commander, why am I the only guy out there swimming in the waves? Everyone should be swimming in the waves. And that's kind of the story of those roiling storms, man. You should be out there and embrace it and say, bring the suck. Just like what Joey's saying, just like what Sean's saying. And those tears, empty yourself of those tears, man. And you will recover. You will rebuild. And again, it is a long-term process that is punctuated by crisis, and you train yourself to understand. And that's why we like the wise old men. We say these people, they're not afraid of anything because they've handled a lot. They've handled a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, thoughts?
For sure. The one thing I should be careful to put across to the listening audience, not to the panel, of course, because we all understand this, is my level of adversity and your level of adversity is different. What I'm used to putting up with is probably not what you're used to putting up with. But that doesn't mean that my 9 out of 10 adversity situation is different than your 9 out of 10, because a 9 is a 9. It just means that my 9 creates a different outcome than your 9. But you got to get right with the idea of find your 9 out of 10 adversity. And for some, that might just be going for a walk in the rain and getting wet. Whereas my idea is living in a swamp for a year. And so they're both forms of wet, but they're both forms of 9 out of 10 for a person who doesn't like getting wet. And so your adversity and my adversity can be equally adverse. But the chances are that I've been working at it longer. If you're 30 and I'm 60, I've probably faced more adversity. And so my 9 out of 10 adversity creates a different outcome than yours. But adverse is adverse. And that's what you should be focusing on, is the scale out of a 10 of the level of adversity that you're willing to accept today. Not next week, not this year. I'm talking about every freaking day. Face some adversity. You get to choose the number on the scale of 10. Secondly, adversity will take you lots of places, teach you lots of things, and you'll learn about yourself. But that's only half of the equation. What I learned for Sean is good for Sean. But unless I put it out into the external world, who's learning anything from my discomfort? I'm learning, but no one else is. And so that's part of this conversation. We've all faced enough adversity that we can put some wisdom out into the world for the people who know us. If at the very least, just our close concentric circle of acquaintances, we can help explain to them in a quiet moment, some evening sitting in a restaurant, what our idea of adversity is and how beneficial it is to them. And so it's none of this journey, this grand experiment is just a single journey. It's a shared experience that we should be passing on our adversity-based learned wisdoms.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I was speaking to my boys the other day, and they were working on some homework. And my son, my oldest, looked at me and he's like, "Man, this is hard, and like my head kind of hurts." And I was like, "Good. That means you're learning." And they didn't understand that. They're like, but my head hurts. I'm not learning. I don't understand what's going on. I'm like, no. And I explained to them that, this is your brain is actually building neural pathways right now. That's why it feels weird. That's why you have that little pain in your head. That feeling of discomfort in the moment of learning or of building or of rebuilding but that moment of discomfort, I think holds back a lot of people just because it's uncomfortable. And I want to ask you guys, is there anything that you've come up with or anything that you've experienced that I'm not going to say makes it easier, but makes it more palatable to experience those difficulties, to really in the moment realize that, oh, this sucks, but okay, it sucks for a reason. Let's get it on, kind of deal. Anything that you could pass on to the world or the youngins of the world that haven't had that kind of experience? Mike, start with you. What do you think? You're muted though. There we go.
So the question again was, is there anything that we can do to help us understand the experience or why we're going through that? Is that the question?
Basically, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of life is, trying to find the meaning, right? I mean, that's what we're always going for, is try to find the meaning. And it is really to question every day. I mean, whether it's journaling, which I do quite a bit. Joey talked about it. I journal, and I will look back at things that seem so very difficult. And then I look back now, I said, what a joker, man. I mean, that was nothing, So I journal a lot because I can go back a year or a month or two. I can even look at my fitness journals. I mean, I can see that I did a sub 6 here or whatever it was. And I go back, I have fitness journals that are 30 years old, and I can say, wow, I did that many push-ups or pull-ups or sit-ups or whatever it is. But I think a lot of it is journaling. That's a great way to help you understand what you're going through, because you have a mindset, a position that you've taken at that particular time. The other is to ask other people, what are your thoughts on it? This is what I'm experiencing, and I'm not really understanding what I'm experiencing. And then trying to recognize whatever it is experiencing. For example, pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Is it a 10? Is it an 8? Is it heartbreak? My wife is leaving me. My kids died or something. But to constantly, when you're going through that, and I do that a lot, is if I am feeling something emotional, I try to understand at what level. Is this earth-shattering? Dr. Ban taught me that. He said, do not catastrophize a moment. Do not catastrophize a moment, especially if you're arguing with your spouse or something. For a moment, break away and say, this is not that bad. We're going to make it. We're going to go through. Those are my thoughts.
Love that. Joey, thoughts on this?
So mine, I'm going to caveat that it's only appropriate for certain situations. Mike brought up fighting with your wife. This would not be the appropriate time to do this. But one of the things I actually force myself to do is either to smile or laugh, just to help myself reframe. Like if, I don't know, random example, but like the SWAT fitness challenges that we do, that our team does, against other teams, they're thrashers. And like, I've had it where everything is cramping up and I'm just feeling like I'm dying, like on these hill runs after we've been swimming and doing all these other like CrossFit WODs and whatever. If you force yourself to like laugh and smile and be like, I don't know if anyone's seen the Jocko clip where like, oh, something bad is happening. Good. It's that same kind of thing that helps you just kind of mentally flip a switch. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, our motto of strength rejoices in the challenge. If you're getting thrashed and smoked and you smile or laugh to yourself and say good, it totally reframes the problem. Again, not appropriate for you're in the middle of a funeral or you're in the middle of a fight with your wife. That is not the time to do that. And that would be understanding the appropriate tool for the appropriate situation. But for a lot of these situations that we're dealing with, especially if it's an internally created panic, forcing yourself to do that is incredibly beneficial for me.
I really love that. And yes, smiling at your wife when you're arguing, not a good call. I've done that. It's not smart. Seb, you got any thoughts on this?
Followed by calm down. So yeah, experience has a cost, and but it also, the return on investment is directly proportionate to the perspective that you'll take on that experience. And so for me, it's really interesting. There's this little thing in my head. It's almost like if I went on a course where most people passed, I was kind of floating and I was kind of trying to do as best I could, but I wasn't really in battle mode. But when I went on a course where every hour, every 2 hours, every whatever, somebody was getting picked off, you didn't know why, and they were gone, I just thrive in that because I knew, like, I will be here when everybody's gone. I just wholeheartedly believed in that to my very core. And that what that did is it allowed me to embrace the difficult steps, each and every single one of them. You don't get to win a jiu-jitsu tournament. You don't get to win an MMA fight. You don't get to get the best job without doing the work. It's the work that's difficult. It's there where the wheels meet the pavement. And I think that, understanding where you are in space and time, and that your proverbial wheels are on the pavement right now, and what you do now matters more than any other time. All the thoughts that you have and all the good intentions and all this good stuff. When you're, caught under a 215-pound brown belt who's an MMA fighter, and you're receiving punches to the face, a lot of people question their MMA career. Like, of course, why wouldn't you? But the person that thrive out of that is the person that understands, like, man, like, this is an opportunity to get better. This is an opportunity to fight through this. This is an opportunity for me to earn what it is that I want. And that makes what it is that I want that much more meaningful. And inversely, if something happens and you don't get what you wanted, sometimes the best thing that happened to you is to not get what you wanted. But what you have gotten out of it is you've gone through it, you've done the work, you never quit, you did all of those things. So you taught yourself a variety of other lessons that are going to be carried over to whatever else you take on. And so, it's only benefits, really. It really doesn't matter. The only time that it stops being a benefit is when you bow out or cower out.
Absolutely. Sean, thoughts?
So the word catastrophize is a great word. And I do find a fair chunk of society is currently in mega catastrophize mode, where the smallest thing is the biggest thing, and the biggest thing is insanely big. And so everything is a freaking problem. Everything is a catastrophe. And so, as Joey said, with Jocko's good, I mean, I love saying good, except there's a variety of goods. And just like Chance, coincidentally, this morning, he hit me up this morning with, "Hey man, I'm under the weather. I woke up, I was hurling, this, that, and the other thing. I might not be able to pull it off, kind of, generally speaking." And I just laughed. I laughed and said, "Right on, good luck," or whatever, just teasing back and forth. And that's kind of key, man, because good can come in many flavors. But you've got to read the situation. You can't laugh at a guy and poke him in the chest and say, "Yeah, you're puking," unless you know the dude, unless you read the situation. Sometimes it requires, all right, it's going to be okay in a few minutes, or all right, it'll be okay in an hour. But sometimes it just requires, that's got to suck. And so we are supposed to hold ourselves accountable and not turn every tiny little molehill into a mountain. But our friends are supposed to do it for us as well. Like, if I'm having a little moan fest, I want one of my brohemos to hit me up with, "Look at that terrible haircut you just gave yourself." Bring it. And so I think that we need friends who observe us closely and don't give us the luxury of moaning. Like, maybe you get a few seconds of moaning, buddy, but that's it. Like, you got to shut that grid down for your friend. You can't let that stuff go rampant, because then it just goes viral. Now everybody's whining. There's There's not enough good people to say good in the world because everybody's got a problem. So we have to keep it in check. And my friends have to keep me in check when it comes to these kind of catastrophizing moments. Oh, I should add this, by the way, that I think there's two ways to create adversity. There's the adversity that if you're living a freaking hard charge in life, adversity is just going to hit you upside of the head, guaranteed eventually, on a pretty regular basis, by the way. But then there's the other aspect where even if you're living that life, even if that's your trajectory where you're pretty regularly being hit with adversity, I don't think that's good enough, to be honest. I think you've got to go out there and force it. Not just let it happen because you're a lunatic. You've got to force it because you're a freaking raging lunatic. And so I'm going to give you the example. We were in Malaysia just at the end of last year, my wife and I, and there was this freaking ridiculous mountain that we decided to go up. And then we decided to run down it. And it took us a couple hours to run down this mountain. And the grade would have been illegal in North America. You couldn't build this road in North America because it was like that. And so other than the fact that about 2/3 of the way running down this mountain, we were assaulted by a horde of monkeys. I had to fight for my wife's honor. Almost had to give the ringleader a boot under the chin and send him into the stratosphere. It came pretty close to not being a pet-friendly moment. That was a freaking hard run, and here's why. My wife is a runner, and I am not. But at the start of the morning, when I woke up, I can't explain why these things happen. But when I woke up, this is the first thought that popped into my head. I'm not going to drink water today until I get back to the hotel. I just thought, I'm going to go hard, and I'm going to go hard dehydrated. It's freaking Malaysia, man. It was bonkers hot. And I've got all the sweat streaming off me. And I'm starting to feel it. At the bottom of the mountain, I just happened to see some guys just a little bit off in the distance doing planks. Looked to be about 30 of them, all men. And I was like hanging on by a thread at that point. But when I saw them, I thought, oh, no, you didn't. And I ran straight over there, dropped down into the plank position. I said, let's go, troops. I didn't know any of them. And we freaking went hard. It was getting competitive. And I was struggling, man. I was getting shaky. And my wife was recording it. And as I was getting shaky, feeling shaky, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to complete this next set of push-ups that this guy's chirping about. But I had to represent. But I hung on by a thread, barely. So when it was all said and done, all the back slaps, all the handshakes, all of the knuckles and all of that good stuff, I walked away from that crew, and I walked away with my back straight, my shoulders back, my chest out, my head up, but with this thought, oh my goodness, I hope I can just walk out of view so that I don't hammer in and they see it. I mean, I was close to hammering in. But that's the thing, man. That moment could have easily not happened if I hadn't have looked over and thought, oh, no, you didn't. You're all going to get it. I'm going to get it. The whole world's going to get it. Let's freaking go. That's how you sometimes got to go, man. You've got to force the adversity, not just be accepting of a bit of adversity.
That is an amazing place to wrap it up. I think this has been a outstanding conversation. So first off, Joey, Seb, Mike, Sean, thank you guys. This has been awesome. We got some questions here and some other comments. I'm just going to run down them real quick to keep the things in the fire here. So Tanya jumped in after the initial question with this. And without hierarchy, giving external feedback weight, how do you train yourself to remain open to feedback from people in your life? And I think we covered that pretty well, so I'm not going to get too into it. She says, I ask because showing people your screw-ups and being truly honest with yourself is how I define vulnerability. And being truly honest, introspective, and allowing others to see/help you on your screw-ups is my definition of vulnerability. How do you suggest we redefine vulnerability to the military/Leos? So with that question there, I'm going to get some final thoughts. So final thoughts on everything we've talked about so far. building, rebuilding, difficulties, everything that we've gone over. How do we redefine all of that to the troops? How do we get the military and Leos and firefighters and all the people who are striving for that kind of life? How do we boil it all down into one little snippet? Seb, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
I always like the use of the word vulnerability because I absolutely do not believe in it at all. I just simply don't. I think you feel vulnerable when you're projecting an image and you are not living up to it, and you're going to get exposed. I think that's where people feel truly vulnerable. I do believe that if you have a solid sense of what you're all about, that you're putting in the work and you're doing as much as you can to control you, which is the only thing you truly control in the end. Having, showing some of the difficulties or showing some of the shortcomings that you have or anything like that isn't threatening to you. It just isn't. And so for me, when I have a conversation with guys, or when I post something and somebody hits me up in the DM and they're like, man, I really don't know how you do it. Like, how do you be so vulnerable? I'm like, vulnerable to who and what? Like, what is it that you think people are doing, waiting for you to put something out so they can go around and do all this thing? It's like, I got some bad news for you. You can never control that. And that's always going to happen anyways. So there is no change in that. But the cost of not doing it and not being yourself and not being, out there and being authentic is going to cost you more than trying to protect yourself against the one person or the two people that are going to take it and run. And so I never really worry about that. And if your sense of self is grounded in things that are real and are fundamentally real and powerful, then you don't get threatened every time that a shortcoming is exposed, if that makes any sense. And so it's all about having the content being there, and you'll worry less about the image that you are projecting. Those two things should not be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, thoughts?
Well, I like what Seb said. For me, a lot of vulnerability for a lot of people is they don't like to put themselves out there. They don't want to speak up because really it comes down to that, there's this painful emotion, this awareness that they have done something wrong or foolish. They don't want to look stupid. Nobody wants to do that. But also that's tied into this thought of fear. And the thing is, I think that nothing in life is to be feared. Now, there are natural fears. There's a grizzly bear charging at you, or you're going to get in the ring and fight someone, and you got to get your nerves in check here. But I think when you can do this, that nothing in life is to be feared. It's only to be understood. And if you can understand something more, it's that you're going to fear something less. And so you're not going to worry about the critique of someone. But simultaneously with that is that thinking will not overcome all fear, but action will. And so you're never going to have that fear completely removed. No, some certain fears will be there, right? In the back of your mind, like your child may be injured, your wife may get kidnapped, those things. But as far as immediate fear, immediate threats, action will get you through. So let's say someone says something to you, you counter that by taking action and say, okay, I didn't like what was said, but I'll take the action. There's no emotion in there. You're not going to feel shame. You're not going to feel guilt. You're not going to feel angry. You're not going to feel pathetic or vulnerable. You're just going to say, okay. And it's kind of almost emotionless or static or stoic, but you have to take the action. You make the change. And it's only after you make the change that you can look back and say, now I know I did what I needed to do, because my character was of low character, or I was weak, or I was needy, or I was angry, something like that. But that's my thought, is that action will always help you overcome the fear. And that fear is tied to that idea of vulnerability, the sense that you are not a person of worth, but we all are. It doesn't matter your biography. It doesn't matter. We're all someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Joey, thoughts?
Yeah, I think the biggest question is, what kind of culture are you creating? And especially in like a team environment, if everyone is afraid to own their mistakes, your team will not improve. You will not get better, because you don't learn anything from only talking about the stuff you do right. When you do an AAR or a debrief, you say, this went wrong, here's how we streamline this. And that starts with everyone at every level owning everything you do, good and bad. And like, I'm going to use an example from this week. We had an operation, we deployed a bunch of gas, and we get into position, and our ATL, I checked, I saw that the launcher was in there beforehand, and we get into position, and our ATL's like, hey, did we have the canisters of gas? And I look, and I'm like, no, we don't. So, we had to shuffle gas canisters. Not a huge deal. We shuffled them around the containment positions. But during the debrief, I made it a point, because I saw another ATL own something else that he did, where he's like, I'm going to throw myself under the bus. And so I said, hey, same thing. Like, I could have said nothing. I could have just let it slide. No, no one would have been the wiser, except for the few people that knew that, hey, Joey freaking forgot all the gas that he was supposed to deploy. But in front of everyone, say, hey, I screwed up. This is a lesson that we all need to learn. We need to do better checks. And it wasn't, there was nothing harmful that came of it. We worked through it, and it wasn't a big deal, but owning that publicly. And I think that's a strength of it's a sign of strength, not weakness. I think not being able to own your mistakes is when bad things start happening. And, if you get called out for something, you got to ask, like, what's the truth in this? Is there something I need to be doing better? Even if it's something, someone was doing something to try to tear you down, you need to ask yourself, is there any truth in this? And if there isn't, screw it, move on. If there is, make that fix, own it, and then move on.
Absolutely. Love that. Sean, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're using the right words. Vulnerability is a word, and as Seb, and I'm in line with Seb. I don't particularly feel vulnerable at any point in my life. What I think maybe is occurring is some people are scared to expose their mistakes, or scared to expose their weaknesses, or are exposed to something that they don't want anyone to know about. If that's what vulnerability is, then okay. Just a handful of days I was vulnerable when I demonstrated me doing an interpretive dance on a mountain bike trail. I was trying to kick a stick, and I was standing on snow and slush and whatever, and I made my kick, and my pivot foot traction slipped on snow, and so I was about an inch away from the stick where I should have been, missed the stick completely. And as I missed the stick, I then went into this, like, I don't know, Julia from Seinfeld kind of interpretive dance. And it was terrible. It should have been embarrassing to anyone out there who hangs their sense of self-worth on having amazing performances. I freaking screw up all the time, man. Like, most of the times I kick the stick. I very rarely fall over, but sometimes I do. And so, like, if I was to put up all my failures on the internet, I could have a bloopers channel. But that's not the message that I'm putting out. More often than not, I kick the stick. Every once in a while, I miss it. But the misses need to be recorded. The misses need to be shown to people out there from time to time. And so, interestingly enough, when I put that clip up, I got hit, I don't know, nearly double-digit times in my DMs with, man, I just think it's so awesome that you keep it real. Man, I just think it's so awesome that you demonstrated that miss. LOL, dude, you're the only one who's keeping it real out there, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not true. There's tons of people that are keeping it real. It's just that lots of people were trying to make the point that not enough people expose their fullness to social media. And I got no problems with that. I have no problems with that at all. But for me, I'm trying to explain to the internet who I am as a total person. And that means demonstrating my screw-ups and demonstrating my successes, and trying to find the right ratio or the right balance to be inspiring rather than depressing, to lead rather than to scare, to et cetera, et cetera. And so the balance that I have to find for myself to the social medias is different than perhaps my neighbor or some of the members on the panel, but it's all our job to figure out the right balance in life to expose these quote unquote vulnerabilities to our concentric circles.
I don't have a whole lot to add to that. You guys are rocking it. So much great information today. The only thing I can do is try to bring it back down. I've been reminded of this quote throughout this whole conversation. It's from Marcus Aurelius, and he says, argue not what a good man is, be one. And I think that's really all it comes down to, is that, as it says right here on the top, every moment, do your best every day. And then you won't have anything to be embarrassed about or ashamed about. You've done your best and you're good to go. So thank you guys. Really do appreciate the conversation. This has been fantastic. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see you next week. Chimo.
Chimo.